Less than 24 hours to go and he ain't going anywhere. I'm talking about, of course, Egypt's President Mohamed Morsi, who's furiously clinging on to power. Opposition activists are calling for new protests in front of the presidential palace this Tuesday evening. This as a state of tension and uncertainty has gripped the country after the armed forces delivered an ultimatum on Monday, giving Mr Morsi 48 hours to reach an accommodation with the opposition. And as the clock ticks very loudly, the ruling Muslim Brotherhood is seeking to mass its supporters to defend him. But the Islamist leader is looking increasingly isolated, with ministers resigning and the Liberal opposition refusing to talk to him. So where to from here? And before I introduce my guest, let me just point out that we're seeing live images there from Tahrir Square in Cairo, once again packed to the rafters with anti-Morsi supporters. And here to discuss this ongoing developing story, in the studio I have Shireen Foti, an Egyptian-American lawyer and professor at La Sorbonne here in Paris. Also France 24's Mohamed Salem, who's been covering the revolution from the very beginning. From London, Zinab Yassin, a member of the Freedom and Justice Party. And from Cairo, we have Egyptian commentator Mohamed El-Dashan. Also from Cairo, Miral Brinji, the spokeswoman for the Dostur Party, or Constitution Party, that was set up by Mohamed El-Baradei, and a key organiser of this latest round of protests. Again, you can also join in the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag F24debate. First of all, and talking about tweeting, we've got a very interesting tweet here, which says, if elected, President Morsi goes, who will replace him, the Commander-in-Chief of the Army or the President of the Muslim Brotherhood? Shireen, what's going to happen?
Well, at this time, what we can see is that because of a failure of having this transitional period in the aftermath of the uprisings of January 25th, we have had a rush into elections. Because that rush occurred so quickly, we didn't have the time for Egyptian society, civil society to develop. We didn't have a chance for political parties to form. And now, by suggesting a similar thing, by having Morsi replaced quickly by a certain leader, that will serve to put us in the same exact place where we are now. What we need is a coalition-type government which engages all Egyptians from many different sectors, which Morsi's government explicitly failed to do from the beginning, from the drafting of the constitution, from discussions, from the intense alienation of all sectors which were opposed to his policies. And if we see a sort of transitional type of coalition government, I believe that we'll have something that is more supportive of Egyptian representation as a whole. What we've seen is a complete lack of addressing Egyptian demands of the revolution, this bread and social justice slogan that we saw made. And even we all often hear the defense of the Muslim Brotherhood being, well, Morsi was democratically elected. First of all, that's even problematic. We can't even say that he was democratically elected because there was so much corruption, vote buying, etc., that occurred during the election, and this will continue on. We'll see this continue.
Shireen, at this point, I just want to bring in our Cairo correspondent Catherine Stapley, who's in front of the presidential palace where crowds are gathering. First of all, Catherine, while the army has given President Morsi until tomorrow, the leaders of the protest movement are wanting him to step down this evening. What's happening where you are?
Well, I'm here out at the presidential palace in Heliopolis. It's an upscale area of Cairo, and there's absolute party atmosphere going on here. People really think that President Mohamed Morsi is on his way out. There's been a lot of patriotic songs. People have been singing along. There's fireworks going off. And they've also been chanting things like, "Down with the rule of the Supreme Guide." And what they mean by that is the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. And demonstrations like these are going on all over Egypt today. These are the opponents of President Mohamed Morsi. But just about 10 minutes down the road from where I am, there's another big demonstration going on, and that is the supporters of President Mohamed Morsi. They're out there staging a sit-in outside a big mosque, and they say that they're going to stay there and that they are supporting him. Now, we've also had a call from the Muslim Brotherhood's Freedom and Justice Party that their members should go out all over the country today and be out there in the streets to show their support for the president. But we also heard some rather worrying talk from a senior Muslim Brotherhood leader, Mohammed Beltagi, who called on all of the Muslim Brotherhood and President Morsi supporters to go out into the streets and prepare for martyrdom in order to prevent the army taking over in a coup. Now, I should stress here that the Freedom and Justice Party have always maintained that people have the right to protest as long as it's peaceful. So that is quite an embarrassing thing to hear from one of their members for them.
Catherine, you know, we can hear the screams, the yells behind you, and I know it's very noisy, but what exactly are they yelling out?
They're yelling things like down with the Muslim Brotherhood rule, down with the leader. We don't want the supreme guide leading us, and that's the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. And why they're saying that is that they believe that he is the one who's behind all of the decisions that President Mohammed Morsi makes, and that he isn't able to do that without going back to the supreme guide for direction every time he makes a presidential decision. We've also heard very patriotic statements too. We've been hearing things like we're Muslims, we're Christians, and we're one hand, we're all one Egyptian nation. And also, of course, we've been hearing the ubiquitous irhal or leave aimed at President Mohammed Morsi.
Catherine, do stay there because we want to come back to you a little bit later. At this point, let me bring in Zainab Yassim from London, a member of the Freedom and Justice Party. Again, you know, you're hearing those shouts. I mean, this is not a noisy minority by any stretch of the imagination. But are you saying that if the president is indeed ousted, that your country could be, Egypt rather, could be facing civil war?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
I'm just saying, you know, given the strength and of the crowd, the numbers of the crowd, the fact it doesn't appear just to be a noisy minority. But what I want to ask you is, do you fear that if indeed President Morsi is forced from the position, if he's ousted, that Egypt could be facing civil war?
There's a very likely chance that will happen, and that just goes to show how many people are for the president as well. Also, you know, I just wanted to answer back, sorry, to your guest in the studio. She said that if every year we elect a president and we don't like him, we'll overthrow him and the revolution continues. Where in the history of the world have you seen a revolution that goes on for 10 years? This is just robbing the country and stealing its stability.
Goes on even more than that, for more than that. I mean, 10 years is nothing.
Well, then you don't complain. Then you do not complain about the president who can't control the country or is not bringing stability. As you can see, there's violence all over the country. Also, in this year, you have to be reasonable and fair when you're judging and passing off judgments very easily. This year,
I'm not the one judging. I mean, the whole people are judging. The people who are on the streets are the ones who are judging, the millions who are on the streets. I wish Morsi would have kept his promises and would have done all what he has said, and we didn't have these protests today.
Can you let me finish without interruption, please?
Let's just hear what Zainab has to say. Sorry, Zainab, continue.
Okay. So yeah, you know, the revolution can't go on for 10 years. The so-called revolution can't go on for 10 years because there will be no stability in the country. Also, I said you have to be fair when you're passing off judgments about Morsi's progress in the last year. Did the country leave him to progress? Did the opposition leave him, give him a chance to progress, or were they so scared to see him succeed? I mean, in the last year, we saw 24 calls for million-man marches. Of course, the turnout wasn't millions, but every time these protests were called, the country was brought to a standstill. Secondly, 7,000 normal protests, 5,000 job strikes. So 24 million man marches alone, that means every 2 weeks a protest was called, yet you come and say, we didn't see any progress from you. Also, can I just finish, please? Can I finish, please?
The people, and I think that the Muslim Brotherhood are really losing ground with this type of discourse. You cannot blame the people for protesting. I think they have very good reasons for protesting.
They must be doing so.
Let me, at this point...
Sorry, can I finish my point, please?
Go ahead,
Right,
Zainab.
I'm not getting enough chance to speak. I'm getting interrupted constantly. Also, you know, your guest also said... Right, sorry. You made me forget my point. You just keep cutting me off every single time.
Zinab,
I've lost my chain of thought.
okay, let me come back to you because at this point I just want to bring in Mohammed El-Dashan, who we haven't heard that much from in Cairo. Mohammed, I just want to sort of talk about the West and particularly Washington and how they're viewing this. This is certainly putting the Obama administration in a very difficult position, isn't it? I mean, we've just heard apparently from the US Secretary of State, John Kerry, telling the Egyptian leadership to respect the wishes of the Egyptian people. But the Obama administration is between a rock and a hard place on this one, aren't they? Mohammed El-Dashan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Sorry, you were breaking up a little bit, but I can hear you. Well, the Obama administration has had quite a track record of mismanaging their relationship to the Egyptian revolution. Back when in early February, the U.S. envoy, his last name escapes me, said that he thought that Mubarak should continue his term, and all the way into the various statements of the successing U.S. ambassadors. They have managed to irk people to a large extent. What has been mostly irking for people and has given them the image that the U.S. administration has been backing the Muslim Brotherhood is that the U.S. ambassador has been regularly meeting with the Supreme Guide of the Muslim Brotherhood, who, despite having no official position, is, well, probably the de facto leader of the country. But the fact that the ambassador would go that far to meet with the supreme leader and so on has given people a very strong impression that that the Obama administration has been supporting the regime of Mohamed Morsi, and well, that has led to situations which are quite amusing if you look at them from the outside. But there's a lot of protests that are actually protest signs are directed towards the ambassador, which is something that I haven't seen in quite a long time. The best thing that the Obama administration could do right now is probably just sit on the sidelines and stop issuing declarations that help no one, definitely not themselves, definitely not the people, and let the course of Egyptian democracy take its own route.
Now, at this point, let me just refer to another tweet here. It says, "I'm an anti-Morsi protester, but I think the military will expedite or help lead Egypt into a civil war with this 48-hour decree." Miral, I mean, there seems to be sort of collective amnesia on the part of many Liberal supporters here about, the army and the way it behaved, particularly during 2011. I mean, do you also fear that the country is heading towards civil war if the situation loses control?
I think concerns about the spread of violence have been largely reduced after the mass protests that took place, where there were not one instance of violence around the actual process. And I think this has been a fallacy that's been, blown out of proportion. The violence was limited to, the governorates and the countryside where the Muslim Brotherhood have strongholds, and still they were resisted by the people. I think that the violence issue, I seriously doubt that Egyptian society is prone to this sort of civil violence, as well as the numbers. I don't think the numbers would even allow for that to happen, because since everybody is talking about numbers, I think Tamarrud is the perfect example of the size of opposition to this regime. They collected more than 22 million signatures, withdrawing confidence from the president, and I think this is in itself the new legitimacy that this entire movement is about. The idea that there is some sort of consensus among the Egyptian people, except, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood and their strategic allies. And I think that this is going to make a difference. But at the same time, there are concerns about the army coming into power. I mean, yes, they said end of the end of the deadline, and then they would draw a roadmap. So there are some concerns about what sort of roadmap is it going to draw. I mean, the Tamarrud demands that 22 million people signed can be interpreted in different ways. But at the same time, I believe that the current leadership in the army has learned a lesson from the former leadership, and they do not want to be responsible for governing the country. I think they want to contribute in protecting national security. Over the past several days, a lot of illegal weapons were caught by the security apparatus. Many arrests were made of people trying to smuggle even heavy artillery in and around the protests. And the idea that the security apparatus and the military are backing the people up.
Miral, at this point, we're just because we're running out of time, and I want to make sure everybody has a fair go in saying what they want to say. Let me just head back quickly to Zainab in London. Given what you've been hearing, Zainab, what do you say? Especially now, given that Egypt's largest ultra-conservative Islamist group in its political arm, the Noor Party, has joined the call for early presidential elections. Again, I'm going to keep coming back to this. How can you, as a member of the Freedom and Justice Party, tell me that President Morsi still has confidence of the bulk of the Egyptian population?
Well, firstly, it's only fair. This is the point I wanted to make earlier before I was rudely interrupted. It's only fair you bring images from the protesters that are protesting for Morsi right now. You can't just bring one side of the story. And this media, this exact media, is what has brought Egyptian people back. This media where, it's very biased, it's extremely biased media. Also, the media played a part, it's defaming President Morsi. It's brainwashed the Egyptian people. These people are new to democracy. They believe what they hear. They believe what they see. They see free media now. They believe it. There's a lot of uneducated people in Egypt. Secondly, can I talk about the 22 million signatures for tomorrow? Again, the validity of the whole campaign has been questioned. The signatures have no reliability. They can't be tracked until you get, external people to monitor it. Then we can't even talk about those 22 million signatures. And if you really had the 22 million signatures, that was enough. It's enough to have overthrown Morsi a long time ago, let alone within these 2 days. I mean, since the 30th of June, we've been waiting for you to overthrow him.
Shireen,
nothing's happening.
What do you say to that?
Yes, well, no, I think Morsi has clearly lost all legitimacy. He's lost his legitimacy because he failed to act in favor of the Egyptian people. He failed to engage all sectors of society. And regarding the military, I think we do need to be cautious about how the military acts. We cannot forget that the military's top officials meet continually with the American military on a continuous basis. They're funded by them, so their objectivity is very much put in question. We have to be cautious about that. And finally, one last point is that when there is a failure of a leader to adequately lead, all sectors around the world, all positions around the world, including that of Montesquieu, one of the most famous rule of law scholars, says there is no greater tyranny than that which is perpetrated under the shield of law and in the name of justice. If the leader gives up that legitimacy, they no longer can rule.
Mohammed?
Even if there was failures, let him finish his term. Why are you so scared to see him succeed?
Zainab,
let him finish his term like the rest of the country.
Zainab, let me just hear what Mohammed has to say.
I just want to talk about the violence point because I think this is not over at all. I mean, it's quite normal that if Morsi is overthrown by the army, that his supporters will spread violence everywhere in the country, especially that they have been saying it. I mean, even our guest from London has been saying that it would probably be the case that we'll head to a civil war. Because these people have won several elections, but at the same time, they have to understand that they have excluded other factions and that they have been governing alone and that they have been undermining the capacity and the willingness of the Egyptian people to improve, their lives. And this didn't happen. Many persons voted for Morsi and now are in the streets protesting against him.
Okay, at this point, let's just cross back to Catherine Stapley, our correspondent in Cairo. President Morsi, Catherine, is quickly losing the support of key ministers. Where does this actually leave him?
Sorry, I think you're asking me about where Mohamed Morsi is at the moment. I think he's a man who's looking at trouble. There was a cabinet meeting this morning. Both the Minister of the Interior and the Minister of Defence, the Army Chief, General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, have failed to show up. I think he's perhaps losing control of state institutions. The Minister of the Interior has said that the officers are free to go and join the protesters if they want to. And so I think he's probably feeling quite embattled by now. But of course, his point is that he was democratically elected in Egypt's first free and fair elections. So under the constitution, under the law, he is president. So I think that that's really what he's relying on at the moment. But whether he can ride this one out, if he does continue as president, he is going to be incredibly weakened by what we're seeing across Egypt.
And Catherine, it's very interesting that that ultra-conservative party, the Noor Party, today joined the call for early presidential elections.
Sorry, I can't.
Sorry, Catherine, I'm just saying it's
very noisy.
I know, I understand. But I was just asking you that it is very interesting that the Noor Party, which is an ultra-conservative Islamist party, has now joined the call for early presidential elections.
Yes, of course, the Salafi Noor Party, they came second in the presidential elections. They had a lot of seats in parliament, but there's really never been much love lost between the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafis. The Salafis have quite actually come out of all of this transition period, really, probably looking the best. They have not really seemed to lose any ground as far as the Egyptian people are concerned. But this is quite an interesting statement. They came out yesterday and said that the early elections should be called for. And today, the Salafi Noor Party is saying that President Morsi should step down. And really, the reason they're doing this is, I think, they're trying to salvage the Islamic project in Egypt. And this is damage limitation as far as they're concerned. If he steps down, then perhaps the Islamists will still have a political future here in Egypt.
Catherine Stapley reporting there from Cairo. Thank you. Now, at this point, I'm hoping to be joined by our Media Watch editor, James Creedon, who, of course, has been keeping an eye on the buzz online. James, of course, you know, the thing about this revolution as such, it all began very much right there on the laptop, didn't it?
It certainly played a role, Annette, and good evening to you, good evening to everybody. Just to take a look at some of what we're seeing online this evening, there have been these timers going up on social media. I suppose some people having a little bit of fun with what is quite a serious issue. So this Morsi timer here is the countdown to the latest deadline. And just some of the comments, some people asking if that's going to self-destruct in the 24-hour timeline. We'll hope not. And another comment here, hats off to Egyptians for their unfailing sense of humour in dark, uncertain days with that Morsi timer, which has been shared quite a lot on social media. Lots of images as well doing the rounds on social media net. This is one from Alexandria.
That is almost, it looks like a painting, does it? I mean, it's an extraordinary image.
I think there was probably some Instagram filter usage there, but it is an amazing photo, and I suppose it shows that it's not just in Tahrir Square, it's not just on front of the presidential palace that these protests are taking place, and photos are being uploaded across social media. Another image that I thought was worth sharing is this one. An Egyptian man holding up a sign in Arabic: "The bearded is not pro-Morsi and the opposition is not an infidel."
And that's part of the problem with traditional media coverage, when we talk all the time about the fact that we have to deal with these formats, that we're running out of time. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult for us as journalists to explain how a situation or a story has multiple shades of grey, that there isn't black and white, and there are people in Egypt who are religious,
Absolutely.
But who are not supporters of Morsi.
And certainly I think that some are trying to get that message across on social media, that perhaps it's not as simple or as black and white as we'd like to think. Now, whether that multiplicity of people protesting anti-Morsi is being exaggerated on social media, that's another question as well, because I think there have been some criticisms of Twitter's take on what's going on in Egypt. You have a whole lot of noise and you do have to sift through it to find information that is reliable or worth taking to heart. This one is kind of funny, I think. It's Al Arabiya reporting Al Akbar Al Yum. Morsi must step down, says Egypt's ousted president.
I have a
Mubarak.
feeling he's probably rubbing his hands in glee,
Right.
James.
Well, as some have pointed out, it took him 18 days of protests in Tahrir Square before he was toppled, and Morsi, some are saying, is wobbling already by day 3. So some, of course, looking to the events of a year ago and drawing comparisons. Also, some looking to other countries in the region and drawing their comparisons, saying Egyptians took down Mubarak, drafted a constitution, elected Morsi, about to take him down, while Bashar still remains in power in Syria. I'm not sure about the order of events as written in that tweet, but it's a valid point that a lot has happened in Egypt in the last year. And perhaps stalemate to some extent still in other countries. Also looking to Tunisia, some people saying, wake up Tunisia, follow the example of what's going on in Egypt where the people are speaking, etc. And you can see online as well that Anonymous in Tunisia are putting their support behind the protesters, while the Tunisian newspaper weekly magazine Capitalist is pointing out that Ennahda are unsurprisingly showing solidarity with Morsi and urging the Egyptian people to respect the electoral process, electoral legitimacy.
Well, in all of these stories, I mean, the thing is, James, the people have found their voice. And at this point, I'm afraid we have run out of time and I'm going to have to leave it there. I want to thank my guests for joining me for this very lively discussion of where to from here for Egypt, and also to James Creedon, our Media Watch editor. Do stay tuned because my colleague Laura Sellier will be here with us at the top of the hour with more news and headlines.